All right, I think we're good. Daniel, go ahead and take it away, buddy.
We're rolling. Okay, thank you, Mike. Okay, so for those of you just joined, this is part 2 of this 4-part webinar series that we're running this week. Today we're going to talk a bit about the scripting functionality of Tabular Editor. So bear in mind, this is a slightly more advanced topic than the introduction that we covered yesterday. But I'll try to have some breaks along the way so that you guys can ask questions. Mostly this presentation is going to show some demos, some sample scripts that are going to show you what's possible using the scripting language, and hopefully that will increase your appetite for doing stuff like this. And yeah, so let's move on. So why would we actually want scripts in the first place? Well, the whole idea behind scripting in Tabular Editor is to make us able to automate tedious tasks. So even if we're using Tabular Editor, which is in many respects superior to the standard tools for editing the data model behind Power BI or for analysis service tabular model, there may still be some things where it would make sense to automate things. So think of something like creating time intelligence measures. Let's say you have a model with 20 different base measures, like your total budget, your sales, your stock count, all of these different things. And you want to create a time intelligence version of each measure where you have like maybe 7 or 8 different time aggregations that you're performing, like year to date, year over year, month to date, quarter to date, so on. And you want to implement this for every single one of the base measures. So let's say you had 10 different time aggregations that you wanted to apply, and you had 20 base measures. Well, now you need to create 200 additional measures that you need to add to your model. Now, this kind of thing is a great candidate for automation because it's basically the same piece of DAX code that you would need for every single one of these measures. You just need to swap out the base measures within each of the time intelligence measures. And this is exactly one of the things that the scripting functionality of Tabular Editor can help you do. It's also possible to reuse the script. So once you've created a single script, you can probably, with very little modification to the script, reuse the same script on a different model that you're creating. So once you paid off the initial investment of actually creating the script, it'll be very easy for you to gain the benefit of having the script the next time you're working with a model or when you're working on a different model. You can actually compare it a little bit to macros in the Office tools, if any of you have worked with that, macros in Excel or Word and so on, that help you automate stuff in the UI. Yeah, and then as you can see on the slide here, there are a couple of examples like, so some of them are currently not applicable for Power BI because Tabular Editor won't let you create relationships for Power BI model, but just for sake of example, basically anything that the UI of Tabular Editor lets you do can be automated through scripting. So the example here with the time intelligence that I mentioned earlier is there. I'll also show you another example where we use something I call a switch measure and a disconnected table pattern, which is also possible to do with a Power BI model, or at least it will be possible very soon, and stuff like that. So one of the things you need to be aware about is that the scripting in Tabular Editor is based on C#. If you're completely new to C# programming, don't worry. I have on my wiki on GitHub, there's a whole collection of samples and small scripts that you can use to get started. And I promise you that by copying these scripts, you should be able to quite easily modify them slightly to suit your needs, even though you might not fully understand what's going on and completely understand the C# syntax. Now, the good thing about scripting in Tabular Editor is that you cannot really break anything, because even if a script is executing and it made some changes and you don't want these changes to apply, well, then you can just hit the Control-Z undo button, and it'll just undo every change made by the script. So you can safely play around with it, try it out, make some changes to the code, run it, and see what happens. That being said, I do recommend that if you really want to go deeper and really gain the most from being able to script things with Tabular Editor, I recommend that you learn some basic C# syntax. and especially that you learn something called language integrated query, or LINQ, which is one of the concepts that we use a lot when we are scripting things in Tabular Editor. So it's a C# concept of working with collections of objects. So when I say collection, think of like the collection of all the tables within your data model. You want to be able to loop through that collection to manipulate it, to access child objects. So for example, accessing all the measures across all tables and stuff like that. And that's where LINQ comes into play. The script examples that I have on the wiki illustrate many of these concepts, so that's also a good place to learn it if you just want to jump straight into the good stuff. And another thing that you need to learn to understand what's going on when you're scripting things in Tabular Editor is the Tabular Object Model. So just to say a few words about that here, the Tabular Object Model, I mentioned it yesterday as well. This is basically the hierarchical representation of your entire data model's metadata. So all of the tables in your data model, all of the columns on those tables, measures, hierarchies, etc., all of those things are represented by this Tabular Object Model. When you save a PBIT file, you can actually unzip that, and you can find a file inside of the PBIT file called model schema data or something like that. And that file is actually just a JSON file that contains all of this tabular object model in a hierarchical structure, the JSON structure. It looks more or less like the picture you see here on the right side of the screen. And that's basically what I mean whenever I talk about the Tabular Object Model. So this model does not contain any data. So any of the data that you imported from your data source is not inside this model. This is only the metadata around your model. So basically specifying how the model is structured, which tables are there, how they are related, and so on. And basically, when you're scripting things with Tabular Editor, you get to manipulate this structure in any way you like, more or less. And for that reason, it may be a good thing to familiarize yourself with the TOM and to understand how things work, and all things considered, you know, understanding things like what's the difference between a calculated column and a measure, and all of this basic stuff around tabular modeling. I really recommend that you spend some time learning that, because that way you definitely get the most out of the scripting functionality. So Mike, I see I just lost your video feed, but are you still with me here?
Yep, we're still here. I just turned off my video to save a little bit extra bandwidth, just to make sure that you get all the extra bandwidth for your video and your screen share here. So I'm still here, don't worry, I'm still monitoring. We had a couple good questions. I think someone was asking around, is there any chance that we can edit a SSAS Adventures Works model with this? So I think the answer is yes. You can connect to a SQL Server Analysis Services instance and touch it and change it with Tabular Editor.
Absolutely. So Tabular Editor was actually created for SQL Server Analysis Services. Just keep in mind that it's only going to work on SQL Server 2016 or newer, because of the way that Microsoft changed the metadata from the XML-based format to this TMSL JSON-based format back in 2016. So if you have a tabular model that runs compatibility level 1100 or 1103, I think, then you need to upgrade those to at least compatibility level 1200, which is what you get in SQL Server 2016. So anything after that, including Azure Analysis Services and Power BI models, you can connect with Tabular Editor, and you can make changes. Also, for you, I recommend also seeing the webinar that I did yesterday. I know that Mike is working on getting those uploaded, so the recordings will be available online, because in my talk yesterday, I also went into some of the stuff around the limitations of editing different kinds of models.
Excellent. Yep, we'll have those up shortly. We're trying to get a 1 to 2 day turnaround here, so trying to work hard to keep the videos edited, and they'll be up on YouTube on the PowerBI.Tips channel. I sent a little message around that one, so stay tuned. Hang out there and come back and look for updates, and we'll get the videos up and you can watch them there.
Awesome. Okay, so So how does the scripting work basically in Tabular Editor? So I already mentioned that this is a C#-like syntax, and there are some things in there that allows you to. So if you're used to working with C# code or .NET, you can actually create your own code libraries in Visual Studio, compile them into a DLL file, and then you can actually reference that DLL file from within the scripting interface in Tabular Editor. But this is a more advanced topic that I'm not going to go into more details here, but just for those of you that are used to this kind of stuff, know that this functionality is available. So there's some special syntax available when you're scripting things. So for example, you'll notice that I'm using this selected object here in the sample script on the screen right now. And this object is a special object that whenever we type selected in the script, we're actually dealing with what the current selection is in the UI. So in the Tabular Editor UI, when you select something in the tree, then this object actually represents the current selection and makes it very easy to work with whatever object you currently have in your selection in order to make certain kinds of changes. And all of this I'm going to show you later on how exactly this works. So this is just an introduction to this. All of this is also documented on the Tabular Editor wiki. So if you want to go into more details about how this stuff works, I recommend you follow the link here. That'll also be in this presentation. And as I mentioned before, if any errors occur during script execution, all the changes made up until that point will be automatically rolled back. And even if no errors occur and the script just executes successfully, you can still use Control-Z and Control-Y to undo and redo the changes applied by the script. So as I said, play around with it. It's more or less impossible for you to break anything. So, and in my opinion, that's the best way to learn this stuff. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, that there is this special object. So I can see actually I made a little typo in here. It should be not selection, but selected, which represents whatever is currently selected in Tabular Editor's UI. But there's also another top-level object that we can work with, which is a model, which basically just represents the full tabular object model. Going back to this slide here, this would be at this point in the tabular object model tree. So this is the entry point that you can, if you just want to work with any objects throughout your model, then you can access the model at this point. In addition to that, there are a number of other, non-standard functions that you can call to do various stuff. So there's an output function that you can use if you want to just get something up on the screen, which is very useful while you're debugging or testing your script. And there are a couple of other interesting calls you can make as well. The format DAX function is useful if you want to call the daxformatter.com web service that Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari, the SQL BI guys, provided, because this will take a string of DAX code and return a nicely formatted version of the same string, basically. There's also a convert DAX function, which is useful if you ever need to convert decimal separators between the UK, US format, where you have decimal separators that are dots, and you want to convert those into commas and vice versa, like the rest of the world use. And so you have all of these methods available that can help you do some interesting stuff with the scripts. The editor itself inside Tabular Editor is kind of limited, at least compared to other code editors like Visual Studio, VS Code, or whatever people are used to working. So there's only limited intelligence. So that's why I said earlier, having a good understanding of the tabular object model is definitely an advantage, so that you know what the various objects are called and how they are related to one another, because the intelligence is not going to help you very much. It can help a little bit, but still it's good to have some understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. One hint that I can give you is that you can actually drag objects from the tree in the UI into the editor to get the full object reference. And just to show that real quick, if I launch Tabular Editor here, and let me just load a tabular model from my local machine here. So this is just AdventureWorks. So what I mean by drag drop is that if I select an object here in the tree, so for example, if I select this measure here, internet current quarter sales, and I just drag it over to the advanced scripting editor, you can see that it actually generates the code that I need here for getting an object reference to this particular measure. So that's also another way you can start to learn and get familiar with the syntax of the scripting. So what I can do here in addition is if I add a little, dot output, and let me just zoom in a little bit once again so you can see. So I add this little piece of code here. This is just telling the script that I want to take whatever is in front of the little dot and just output it on the screen so I can see what I'm working with here. And in this case, if I run the script, it'll just show me this window that basically represents all the properties of this particular measure. So basically, the output function that I'm calling here at the end can be used with anything. So even if I just had a basic string, which looks like this, and I run this, you can see what it does. It basically just says, "Okay, hello world." So that's all you need to get started with code, right? You just need to see how a hello world program works, and then you're good to go. Okay, yeah, and as you saw, drag and drop works quite easily. To execute the code, you can hit the little play button up here, or you can hit F5. It will only execute the current selection. So if you have two of these guys in here and you select one of them and hit run, it'll only provide the output once because it's only executing the code that I selected. Okay, right. So without further ado, I think yeah, okay, that's one more slide here. You can go over that for those of you that are into the more advanced stuff. It shows how you can reference external code. Like if you have your own custom DLL that you want to include, it's possible to reference that as well. There's a concept in C# called namespaces. For those of you that are familiar with C#, you'll know that you can call them like this. And also there's some information here about how you want to, if you want to create a reusable function, well, then you use something called a lambda expression. So yeah, I'm not going to go into too much details about this. You can investigate this on your own. Let's go over to the actual demos that I want to show you and some of the sample codes that I want to show you. But before we get to that, just let me know if there are any questions at this point.
So far, looking over here at the questions, we are doing good. There's no new questions. Everything's going is cruising along. So let's go to demo time.
Awesome. So most of the demos that I'm going to show you here today will be taken from this article here on the wiki, and this should also be one of the links in the presentation. And basically, this is just some samples that you can use to get started. For example, there's a script here that shows you how you can create measures from a selection of columns, generate time intelligence measures, and so on. So this is a good place to get started looking into the code. Yeah, let's see how that works. So since this is actually this webinar series revolve around Power BI Desktop, the first couple of samples I'm going to show you are samples that you can actually use today on a Power BI model. The only thing I need to say about that is that Power BI Desktop currently does not support making changes through Tabular Editor. So there are some hacks that you can use, but officially those are not supported. So that means if you make some change that break your PBIX or PBIT file, well, then Microsoft support will not help you. So that being said, Microsoft just announced last week that in a couple of months from now, we're going to get this external tools integration feature here in Power BI Desktop. This is not yet publicly available, but it will be in a couple of months. And once this is introduced, you will be able to make certain changes to your Power BI model through tools like Tabular Editor in a fully supported way. And those changes would be creating and editing measures, perspectives, translations, and calculation groups. Later on, we fully expect that you'd be able to edit more kinds of stuff, but those will be the initial things. And for the samples that I'm going to show here today, being able to create measures from an external tool is exactly what we want to achieve. So even though it's not supported today, you can still experiment with it. Just promise me that you keep a backup of your PBIX file and your Power BI template. So
we can't stress this enough. We can't stress this enough. You know, caution, caution, caution. It's not ready for prime time yet. So, you know, this is uncharted territory. Don't call Microsoft. Don't say, hey, you watch this YouTube video from Michael and Daniel and it broke my PBIX file. So big caution right here, not supported yet. It will be soon. So you're seeing some early stuff here, but you know, you can start playing with it today. Save a backup copy.
Yes, exactly. That being said, if any of you are using Power BI Premium and you have a model that has been deployed to a Power BI Premium dataset, and that you happen to be using this new feature here, the preview feature around storing datasets using enhanced metadata format, this guy. If you have any datasets that are published to Power BI Premium and you have the XMLA read-write enabled for your workspace, then you can actually connect Tabular Editor to your Power BI Premium workspace and make changes today that are fully supported. I think XMLA read-write just hit, it was just announced that they hit the public preview last week. Yep. So being in public preview means that it is fully supported, but there may be some bugs still, because, well, that's obviously why it's a preview feature. But at least then you'd have a way to actually make these changes in a way that is fully supported and actually endorsed by Microsoft. And for those of you using analysis services, Tabular, just go nuts. Everything I show you here is fully supported. Okay.
Rock on.
Right. So that being said, I'm going to do something that is not supported today, just to show you that it's possible, but hopefully to illustrate the power of using scripts inside Tabular Editor. So what you see here is a very, very simple data model loaded into Power BI with just a couple of tables here. There's an internet sales fact table and a couple of dimensions that have been linked to that. And so what I could do is I could press this little button up here and it will actually launch Tabular Editor already connected to this data model. But for those of you that don't have the external tools ribbon, which would be most of you as of right now, what you need to do instead is you can either export your model as a Power BI template, a PBIT file, and then you can go and open the PBIT file in Tabular Editor. Alternatively, you can launch Tabular Editor and you can actually use the file open from database option here. And doing that, there's this little drop down here where it says local instance. If you're using this, you can actually connect directly to the analysis services instance running behind Power BI Desktop. So in my case, I'm just going to do this. You get this little warning in Tabular Editor that we are about to do something that is not supported by Microsoft, so we proceed at our own risk. And there we have it. Here's the same data model that is currently loaded in Power BI Desktop. We see the same data model loaded into Tabular Editor. Yesterday I talked about the various UI elements of Tabular Editor. Over on the left here we have the tree where we can see all of the objects, and this hierarchy that we see here is actually fully identical with the Tabular object model itself. So objects are placed in the same positions in this hierarchy as they would be in the underlying Tabular object model. So this is also a good place to learn how the Tabular object model works, of course. So let me just switch back a second here to the report area. So I just wanted to show you that right now, all of the so right now this model doesn't contain any measures, right? It only contains the tables. It contains the relationships between the tables, and then each table, of course, contains a number of columns. So one of the first things that you want to do when you create a new model is you want to create the explicit measures. And now we could just go in here in Tabular Editor, right click on a table, choose create new, measure, and we could create an empty measure to add to our table. But instead of doing that, I'm going to use a script instead, because I actually want to create many measures in one go and not just a single one. So the first script that I'm going to present to you today is a script that lets us automatically generate some measures based on the current selection of columns. I'm just going to zoom in here for a little bit so you can see what's going on. So basically, what you see here, this script is, it starts out with looking at the currently selected columns in the Tabular object tree. So basically, whenever it says selected, it means whatever we as a user of Tabular Editor currently have selected in the tree on the left side. And in this case, we're only going to consider columns, so that's why it says selected.columns. And then this construct over here is called a for each loop. And this is some special C# syntax, but basically what it means is we're going to iterate over every single column in this collection of columns that are currently selected. And then for each of those columns, we're going to execute the code that's in here, where C, in this case, the letter C represents the current column of the iteration. So what this code actually does is it says, okay, consider the current column, which is C, consider the parent table of that column, so basically the table that owns that column, and then add a new measure to that table. I'm just going to clear this out because it's getting a little difficult to to read with all the highlighting I'm doing. So basically this method here, this function here, add measure, what it does is it allows us to add a new measure to a table, as the name suggests. And add measure takes 3 parameters. The first one is the name of the measure, so the name that the new measure that we are going to create should have. In this case, I'm going to use the name of the column, and then I'm going to split it. So there's a helper function here called split camel case. And actually, someone corrected me recently that this is not actually camel case, but Pascal case. But that aside, basically the idea here is that if I have a column that's called sales amount in one word, I want to split that word into 2 words, sales amount. And that's basically what this function lets me do. The next parameter here in my add measure function is the DAX expression that I'm going to assign to this measure. And finally, the third parameter would be the display folder that I want to place the measure into. So basically what this code does is adds the new measure, assigns the name, DAX expression, and display folder as specified here. And then in the last line here, I'm just going to hide the column, because once I've created the explicit measure, I no longer want the source column to be visible in the table. So we're just going to hide that. And yeah, let's see how it works. So if I select a number of columns here on the left side, so let me select discount amount, extended amount, tax amount, and sales amount. So I have these 4 columns selected, and I just held down Control on my keyboard in order to be able to multi-select these 4 columns. And now I execute the script. And you can see what happened here was nothing, basically. Oh, that's because I had currently hidden the measures. So you see up here on the left, you see we have these buttons. So right now I highlight the one that says show hide measures. This is basically just filtering the tree. Let me just go back so you can appreciate once again what happens when I execute the script. So now I just toggle this to make sure that I show all the measures of the model. Right now there are no measures in here. Let me once again multi-select the columns that I want to create explicit measures for. And let's run the script. Boom, and there we have it. So 2 things happened here. First of all, it created 4 new measures, these guys. But also you can see that the names of the columns that we had selected have faded to gray, and this fade means that now the columns are hidden in the data model, so they will no longer be exposed when we are building our report in Power BI. And going through every one of these measures that were created here, we can see that the DAX expression that was assigned to each of them is just simply the sum of whatever column we had originally selected. So for the discount amount measure, we just sum internet sales discount amount. And that's basically what the script did. So the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to save these changes. And since we loaded the model by connecting to our instance of Power BI, what happens when we click save is that the changes that we made to the model here are going to be synchronized back to the instance of analysis services running underneath Power BI Desktop. And when that happens, as you see, now you can see the little calculator icons turned up here on the right, and the corresponding columns got hidden. So now we actually have explicit measures for these guys. So discount amount provides some figure here. Oh, that was a bad example. Let's take this guy instead. Sales amount, and you can see that it's actually connected here, so that if let's say I modify this expression, let's say I need to subtract 10% for some reason, so just modify this expression slightly, and we hit save again, then we can see that the figure here in Power BI Desktop changes immediately. Now, bear in mind, this is one of the new features that depends upon the external tool ribbon becoming available. So if you go and test this stuff on your own version of Power BI Desktop, it probably won't update the figure that you see here the moment you click save. You'd have to go and refresh your data model before you see the figures here refresh as well. So just keep that in mind for now.
If you guys could see my face right now, I'm literally grinning from ear to ear on this one. I don't know how many times, again, people who do 10, 20, a lot of, 30 measures, or even building proper, and from my experience, building proper model design from a tabular model to Excel, you can't have any implied measures. You need to take every single numerical column and apply an explicit measure to that column. So when you're just trying to make a data model that can both be used by Power BI and Excel, this one script alone is huge from an ability to be able to quickly go through and hide and create explicitly called out measures. I'm so excited for this. This is great. I'm so happy for this. This is really, really exciting. I love this part.
And actually, what you said right there, Mike, about always creating explicit measures, this is what we call a best practice when we're building Power BI models. And tomorrow, when we're going to dive into the best practice analyzer, this is actually one of the topics that I want to show you how we can use the best practice analyzer to ensure that we are always creating explicit measures and not exposing numeric columns directly for aggregation. So yeah, good point.
Another big win. Yeah, you guys thought today was going to be amazing. You wait till tomorrow comes. There's even more amazing tomorrow. So this tool just keeps giving and giving and giving great ideas and really, really helpful tips and tricks here. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but this is I can't explain enough how important this is. That this is huge. This is a really big change coming that's going to really speed up your modeling ability.
Right. So, are there any questions at this point, Mike? Otherwise, a
couple have trickled in. Someone is asking why the question mark symbol inside the measures.
Why the question mark symbol?
I think you're referring to the little blue dial that's actually next to the measure. I think we explained this one yesterday.
Yeah.
Yep, that little question mark there.
Yes. Right, so the question mark here is a feature of Tabular Editor, and basically what it indicates is that you made some change to the DAX code of this measure without having synchronized the instance of analysis services yet. The problem right now with Tabular Editor is it's not able to validate the DAX code that you write because I don't have a DAX parser built into Tabular Editor, so it cannot validate the DAX syntax. You can basically type anything in the DAX expression, and Tabular Editor will have no way of knowing whether what you are typing is indeed correct or if you made some kind of mistake. So until you hit the save button, this little blue icon is going to show up, indicating that you should deploy or save the changes to your model in order to validate if the expression is correct. So another way for me to illustrate this, let's say I put something here. Let's say I put something here that doesn't make sense. That's not a valid DAX expression, and you can see again we get the little blue question mark here. Now if I hit save, synchronizing this change to analysis services, you can see that now the question mark turns into a little warning sign. And this is indeed because now this measure has an error. And you can see also Power BI Desktop complains that something is wrong. And if you hover over the measure in Tabular Editor, you can actually see the error message returned from analysis services. So in this case, of course, it's because I have some invalid syntax here. So I need to fix this before moving on. So hopefully that answers the question.
That gets it. There's another question is asking, hey, can we, do we have the ability to format the measures inside a script? So providing, I think Victor's asking, can we apply additional formatting properties to that measure as well, not only just making like a sum?
Yeah. So I'm so glad that you asked this question. So not only can you access any of the properties of the measure here. So if you need to change the format string to something else, it's certainly possible to do that as well. So in fact, let me just show you how easy that would be. So I'm just going to delete the 4 measures that I created initially, and then I'm going to modify this script here a little bit. I'm going to zoom in.
Yeah, make it big if you could. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, great. That's really good.
So now the add measure function that I'm using here can only set the 3 arguments that we talked about here, the name, the DAX expression, and the display folder. However, the add measure function itself returns a reference to the newly created measure. So if I define a variable here, and in C# you define a variable by writing a var, and you give it a name, let's call it new measure, and we set it equal to whatever is returned by this function, then you can go down here and you can set any property that you want on this particular measure. So if we wanted to set the format string to something else, we would simply write something like this, right? And in fact, let me just run this right now to show you that it actually works. I'm going to select a couple of columns, run the script, and you can see that now it spits out the 4 new measures. And looking down here in the format string, you can see that indeed it's been set to 0.00, just as specified in the script.
This stuff's incredible. This is blowing my mind right now. This is awesome.
You can set other properties like the description. This measure is the sum of, and then you can provide, I don't know, the column name or whatever. Let's try to run it one more time. I'm just going to undo the changes I made before, select the same columns once again, run the script. And you can see this time we also have some nice documentation for what these measures contain, right, in each of their description fields. So that's also possible. So basically any property exposed through the Tabular object model can be edited through scripting. Now, if you were asking,
can I jump in for another point there real quick? So Daniel, this new measure description. So sometimes when I'm building models, I like to put the formula of the measure inside the description. So I work in sometimes where the model is not inside my Power BI report. They're 2 separate entities. Maybe I'm pointing to analysis services. And what Daniel just showed you here is you can actually take the formula that made that measure and put it inside the expression of the description. So that way, when end users are looking at your data model right here, like with new measure.expression, you can now very quickly write in all the new measures and their formulas back into the description. So when an end user or a consumer of the report is looking at a data model, they can go right in and say, oh, I can see how this is being calculated. I can see this is a sum of a different column. I can then know how that's working. So again, super cool.
So just for your example, Mike, let's say you already had a model that maybe already contained hundreds of measures, and now you actually want to set the description property of each of these measures to be equal to the DAX formula of the measures. Well, instead of in that case going through and selecting each and every one of them, remember that there was also another top-level object that we could get a hold of here in the scripting interface. Instead of just the selected objects, we can also go and get the model objects. So in case we wanted to iterate through all of the measures in our model, what we could do is something like this, where we write for each var m in not selected, but model. And then you see that model actually has something called all measures. So right now the intelligence doesn't work, but that's because I have all of this for each stuff. A little tip here is if you want to investigate which objects are available, then go to an empty line, type the name of the object that you want to access initially, put a little dot, and then you can see the intelligence drop down shows up here with all the properties and methods and so on that you can access. And one of these properties is this guy here, all measures, which basically is, as the description says, a collection of every measure across all tables in the model. So if we use this collection, and we create the same loop as we had before, this for each loop, then basically now we have a handle that we can use to manipulate every single measure of our model. So what we want to do is simply set the description property equal to the expression. Then all we have to do is something like this. And you can see, so right now, the description of each of these 4 measures that I have in my model is the one I created before. Oh, hang on. Oh, so now I accidentally deleted the measures, I think. Yeah, I'm okay. I know what's going on right now. Apparently, I think, yeah, okay. So, yeah, sorry. This is because I'm messing up the shortcuts on my keyboard with the shortcut key for
sorry.
But anyway, here's the measures that we had before, and you can see we have this description on them right now. This measure is the sum of tax amount, blah blah blah. But now, if we execute this script, we don't even need to select anything over here. If we execute this script, it'll go and set the description of every single measure in our model to be equal to the expression. And that means that for client tools that expose the descriptions in some way, for example, by showing a tooltip or whatever, you now have some documentation on what's actually going on that's surfaced to the end user.
That's excellent answer. We have a couple more questions.
Okay.
Someone was asking, so we've seen you make some measures with the scripting. Someone was asking, can you just right click somewhere and make a measure using a right click? And I said, I think yes, you can right click in the tree, and from the context menu, you can automatically make a measure there. And there's also a shortcut key, Alt-1 as well, if you want to just hit that as well.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So creating new measures is just a matter of, so in this case, I'm just hitting Alt-1. You can see you can set the measure name like this. And then of course, yeah, you can edit them. So even if you don't want to use the scripting interface, I mean, just creating new measures is just a breeze in Tabular Editor, and you don't have to wait for the little spinner that says working on it every time you make a change. Only when you click the save button up here, you would have to wait 1 or 2 seconds for the model to get synchronized with the changes that you make here. But all of this, I'm covering that in more detail on the session we had yesterday. So once the video is available, please go ahead and watch that. So this is about scripting. So unless there are more questions, I'm going to go over to the next sample. Yeah,
we're good. We're good to keep going. Keep zooming through it. We have a question I think I'll give you towards the end here, something about scripting for perspectives, but let's get to that a little bit later. I think let's get through your stuff first.
So one of the next things I want to show you is one of the examples I mentioned in the beginning around being able to create time intelligence measures. And so the first script I'm going to show you here is a simple one that looks a lot like the one we had earlier, where we created measures from columns. But the difference here is that now we are iterating through the selected measures. So the idea here is that now we're adding a new measure for every one of the selected measures. And looking at the code we had before, you can see that this is almost identical. It adds a new measure. Now it names the new measure same as the original measure, but then it adds space YTD. And then the DAX expression for the new measure is going to be total year to date. And then this special name here, DAX object name, basically gets you a full DAX reference to the original measure. Since if I had just written mname, we would just get something like sales amount. But in DAX, when you're referencing another measure, you have to put it in square brackets, as you know. So that's what DAX object name gives you. It's going to give you a string that looks like this instead. So that's basically why I'm using this DAX object name. If this had been a column instead, it would put the table name in front. As you know, you should always put the table name in front of column references, and you should never put the table name in front of measure references. And DAX object name takes care of that. Also, for total year to date, we're going to need a reference to our date column on the date table, which we have here. And this is what this guy here does. Just hard codes that in the string. Of course, if your date table is called something else like calendar or whatever, you'd have to adjust this accordingly. And finally, it reuses the same display folder as the original measure. So let's try to run the script and see what happens. So now I'm just going to select a single measure here, and I'm going to click run. And you can see immediately we get this discount amount year-to-date column down here. So basically the script generated this new year-to-date measure for us. If we look at what the DAX expression looks like, you can see indeed it just says total year-to-date, discount amount, and then date. So basically here we have our first auto-generated time intelligence measure created through our script. Now, of course, we don't need to stop there. We could select multiple measures and have this script generate the year-to-date measure for all of them at once. Or we could expand this script to not just create year-to-date measures, but create any kind of date calculation that we need. And for that, I've already prepared a script that does exactly that. So you can see it's a little more involved. This script, it has a few more lines of code, but the patterns are basically the same. So I made it a little more generic by letting you specify the name of the date column in your model at the top of your script. And also you can configure a display folder for all of these measures to appear in. So if you want to have them placed somewhere else, you only need to modify the 2 lines here at the top of the script, and then those variables will be reused across the script whenever we need a reference to the date column or whenever we need to know which display folder to put the measure in. So I don't want to go over this in details because you already see most of this code. This is just new versions or new variants of the same code, basically, creating year-to-date, previous year, year-over-year, and so on measures. So instead, I'm just going to show you the magic happening. So let me select these 4 measures that I created before. And keep in mind, this could have been 30 measures instead of just 4. And then what happens when I run the script? Boom, we get a new display folder. And inside that display folder, you'll see now I got a whole bunch of measures here, like all the various flavors of my discount amount, extended amount, sales amount, and so on. All of this was just instantly generated when I ran the script. Is this amazing or what?
This is freaking, this blows my mind right here. I was working on a project with an individual recently where we had to build out all of the measures for the end users, and they required all these different types of time intelligent calculations. And we spent hours building all of this. This is absolutely incredible. All right, there's a couple questions.
Yeah.
On your examples, do you have some examples around using month to date, year to date with the calculate statement wrapped in there?
So I think if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that one of these is using the previous year measure is actually using calculate. So let me find the same example over here. You can see it actually generated a measure that uses calculate around the extended amount. I don't know if that answers the question, but
yes, it does. They're extremely happy. Yes, yes, yes! Exclamation point, exclamation point! They're super excited
awesome.
about that. So that's a big win. One other. Oh, go ahead.
So yeah, just one comment here. So the scripting itself does not put any constraint on the complexity of the DAX expressions that you can create. It's completely up to you when you create your script to author this expression here, this C# expression that sort of generates a DAX expression. And you can see in this case, with calculate, then the object name, and so on. And actually, one tip that I'm going to give you here is if you wrap this whole thing in this format DAX function. Remember I said earlier on in the presentation that we have this format DAX function available that we can use whenever we want to call the DAX formatter in order to format our code. Well, we can do that as well. So let me delete all of this. Let me run this guy again. And now take a look at what happens to the previous year measures. Oh, hang on. Oh, I need to select a number of measures here before this works. So this time it takes a little longer, but that's because now for each of the measures it's selected, it has to go and call the DAX formatter web service in order to properly format this DAX code. So now if we go into one of these previous amount measures, we should see that you'll notice here that now a couple of additional spaces have been added to the DAX code. I know it's a stupid example, but these spaces weren't there before. Those have been added by the DAX formatter web service. But you can easily imagine if you had generated some more complex DAX expression that was longer and had more additional calculates or whatever in there, then it's actually nice that you can easily call DAX formatter to have the code formatted nicely in the resulting measure.
This feature alone, again, I can't express this enough. This whole concept of scripting is the hugest time saver I could ever imagine. The fact that you can then kind of walk into any model you need to, pick a couple measures that you know are going to be sums and you want to do some time intelligence. You can have you can now build common scripts that you're going to run on every single model that you're going to need to execute, and the code will come out exactly how you expect it to. The formatting will be exactly what you expect. This is a huge time saver. This will save you hours off your life making time calculations. This is absolutely incredible. I'm so excited about this.
Did we have a question at this point?
We have one last one. Once Tabular Editor is publicly available under the external tools, when will we be able to save to folder measure to source control the PBIX file? If yes, would that also be able to sync back to PBIX to the PBIX folder? So I think I can help answer some of this one. I don't think the PBIX file is going to be decompositionable in the same way you can decomp the model of the file. So a PBIX file is like a zipped file of a bunch of components that make up a report. Tabular Editor does not break the PBIX file into its raw components. So you could version certain pages or you do everything, handle it with DevOps. This is purely tabular editing only.
Yeah, and even though and then you could argue, well, then can I take the PBIT file and do something with that? It's absolutely true that you can use Tabular Editor to save the tabular model into a folder structure. Unfortunately, there's no way to compile that back into a PBIX or PBIT file. That's simply not supported at the moment, and I'm not sure it's going to happen anytime soon. At least not to my knowledge. So the idea about being able to save to folder is more for, and we're going to cover this in more detail on Friday when we're going to talk DevOps. It's more for scenarios where you are able to publish directly to a Power BI premium dataset or an instance of analysis services, because then it suddenly starts to make sense that you can pick up the model metadata from a folder structure directly from your source control environment and then deploy that directly to Power BI premium or Azure analysis services or whatever. That's how we're going to use the save to folder structure. Perfect. So for actual versioning of your PBIX files, I'm afraid we don't have a good solution for that yet, unfortunately.
All right, so I'm going to, for the sake of time, Daniel, I know you probably have a lot more content to get through on scripting. How are you running on time? Let's keep going with your stuff. I think okay. I'm going to hold off on questions for now and keep letting you cruise.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just show you one more interesting example here of a script that we can run. So a while ago, Marco Russo at SQL BI created this article on how to create a very special kind of measure. He called it a dump filters measure. This was actually, I think this was before we got some of the new filter pane in Power BI Desktop. But basically the idea is that you create a measure and add it to your Power BI model, a measure that can show you what the current filter context is. So basically showing you which values are being filtered and so on across all of your different tables in your model. And now it does take some time to create this filter measure. I think DAX Studio can actually generate it for you because the code for it is kind of complex. But this was just to show that this is another example of stuff that you can create in Tabular Editor. So I'm just going to copy this script here, move it into the scripting editor in Tabular Editor, and then I'm just going to hit run.
Yep.
And we can see that now we suddenly got this new dump filters measure down here. And the interesting thing happens when we go to the expression editor, where we can see the DAX expression of this measure. You can see this is this huge DAX expression that would have taken hours if we had to write that by hand. And moreover, if we had to maintain this, you can see this is actually.
Oh my gosh. This is, how many lines is that thing?
I think that was. Oh, hang on.
10,000 lines?
I think that was. Here it is. Yeah, this is 1,250 lines of DAX code.
Holy cow.
that the scripting interface just spit out like that.
That's awesome.
So this would have been incredibly difficult to maintain by hand, but now we can add it to our data model very easily if we need this sort of measure. Other stuff we can do. So yeah, and another one that I'm another one that I'm using quite often is consider a scenario where you have many different measures and you want to provide a single measure and a new dimension or a new table, a slicer where the user can pick which of the measures they want to see. So basically, instead of the user having to select a specific measure to display on a chart or something like that, you want to have a slicer on which the user can decide which of the measures they want to see. So there's a pattern for that you can use in DAX, which basically utilizes having a switch measure and a disconnected table. So basically just a table that doesn't have any relationships to other tables in your model. And then the idea is that based on whatever the current user, whatever the user has currently filtered on the disconnected table, you use the selected value DAX function to detect what the current filter is, and based on that, you combine that with a switch statement in DAX in order to choose the correct measure to show based on the user's selection. Let me try to run the script, and then I can explain to you how it actually works. So in this case, I select the measures that I want to include in this switch thing. So I'm just going to use my discount amount, extended amount, sales amount, and tax amount. Then I'm going to execute the script. And you can see now Tabular Editor actually added a new table to the model. And now this particular thing here will not be supported by Power BI Desktop, at least not in the near term. So I'm going to use a slight workaround here. So you can see that Power BI Desktop actually, Tabular Editor actually generated a new calculated table. And it provided this DAX expression for the table. So this is basically just hard coding the list of measure names in my table. Now, since Tabular Editor is not able to create a calculated table in Power BI Desktop, it's probably going to crash if I hit the little save button. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to copy this DAX expression that was generated by the script, copy that, switch over to Power BI Desktop, and then just add a new calculated table.
And this is one of the unsupported things. So this is a Power BI Desktop does not like other things modifying entire calculated tables for it at this point in time. Maybe in the future that'll be supported, but for right now it's not supported. So that's why it would crash.
Yeah. So I'm just copying the DAX expression in here, making sure that the name of the table is the same as what my script would have created, and then we hit the OK button. And then we should see we now get this KPI list table, which just contains the list of measure names here. Going back to Tabular Editor, I'm then going to actually what I need to do here is it's a little cumbersome right now with the integration here, but let's go back here, reconnect, and now we should see that this KPI list table actually exists inside of our data model here. So I'm going to run the script once again. And there are my measures here: discount amount, extended amount, sales amount, and tax amount. And this time we are not going to add the calculated table. Or wait a second. Yeah, I probably need to. Yeah, so the last time I demoed this, I used it on another services model, and therefore I was able to execute all of this without any issues. But in this case, I cannot add the calculated table to our Power BI model because it would break Power BI probably. So what I'm going to do instead, in order to get a reference to this new calculated table, I'm just going to drag it from over here, and then I get a reference to the table. So basically by doing this and executing the script once again, an object with the name KPI list does not exist in the collection. Okay, that's weird. I guess, hang on 1 second.
No worries, this is where live demos become a bear.
Yeah, no, this is because the script actually tries to delete the table if it already, if it already exists. So I'm just going to copy that part out, and let's run this one more time. And there we go. So now what the script did, it added a new measure down here to KPI lists. You can see there's now also a KPI measure inside the KPI list table. If we click on that measure and inspect the expression, we can see that this uses the selected value and the switch pattern that I mentioned a moment ago. And basically what happens now when I click save, we should see over here in Power BI Desktop that we now also have the little KPI measure over here on the right. And ultimately, it means that I can now I can now slice my measures basically. So I can bring in my KPI measure here in a card. Oh, we're getting an error here. Let's see what that is. Oh, okay, so it's saying that it needs to refresh the table. Okay, that's weird. It's probably because the first time I ran the script, I accidentally deleted the table. But no worries, we can quickly just refresh this. It shouldn't take more than a couple of seconds.
So I also threw, while we're waiting for that to refresh, I actually dropped in a quick little article from PowerBI.Tips that actually uses a switch measure in it. It's the exact same scenario. I have kind of like some buttons on the page, and I want to maybe click a button, and I want the chart to show me a different measure, or I want the chart to show me like sales or dollars or something else. So I threw a little example in there for people who want to follow along and see how to use a switch statement to toggle between measures if needed.
Yeah, and that's exactly the kind of thing I'm doing here. Now, the reason I'm having some issues here with this demo is because I'm actually using completely unsupported features of Power BI Desktop, as I mentioned initially. This stuff I'm doing here with adding calculated tables and stuff like that through Tabular Editor is completely unsupported at the moment. If I had connected to a Power BI dataset that was published to a Power BI premium workspace, this would have worked just fine, same as if this had been analysis services or something like that. So now let me see. So now I managed to repopulate the calculated table here. And now going back, we should see that, yeah, so now my measure actually works. It returns blank right now, but that's okay. I add a slicer, and then I add the KPI name selection. And now you can see that we can switch between the various measures here. So now this model is not very interesting, but we can see that it actually works. Depending on which of the measures I select here in the slicer, it actually changes the figure, and we can even see that this should correspond with whatever I have in these measures individually. So here, for example, the extended amount, it should match once I select the extended amount here. So you get the basic gist of this.
This is cool. This is going to help automation a lot. One thing that I'm just recently working on is doing custom disassociated binning tables. Similar kind of concept. So it's the idea of I have a table that has bins of information in it, and I need to have a measure, a standard measure, applied to that binning table to whatever information I want in the Tabular model. And with scripting, this now makes all of this automatable. You can now build it once and reuse this. This is like my story. I love the story of being able to build it once and reuse over and over again. I hate having to write the same thing twice. It seems so ridiculously laborious and non-helpful in the long run.
Yeah, and I mean, all of the examples that you've seen here today are on a very, very small model with only 4 or 5 tables and only a handful of measures. But the thing is, in real life, models have hundreds of tables and sometimes thousands of measures, and just being able to manage that in a more clever way instead of, having to go through things one by one in Power BI Desktop is just a huge time saver. So yeah, strongly recommend that you spend some time reading up on this. Go to the wiki on the Tabular Editor GitHub site. Look through the samples there. There's also another article which sort of goes through much of the introduction I presented here with how to work with the Tabular object model and how to work with the link and so on. All of these C# concepts. Go have a look. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on the GitHub site as well. And with that being said, I mean, I can take some questions now if there are any.
So for those of you who need to leave and go back to work and do regular things and make money for your companies, you feel free to drop right now. We're going to do there's only 2 questions that I see right now that we'll try and get through. Victor asks, to give the format to all the time intelligence measures in the script, would we need to create a variable for each one like we did before? So if, for example, if we're formatting, it sounds like it would be like units versus dollars inside the formatting of the in particular measures in the switch statement.
So yeah, so now with the switch statement, you can't really, I mean, yeah, you can use the DAX format function, but that would actually cause the measure to return a string instead of a number. And if that's what you wanted to do, basically you would have to somehow provide the format string here somewhere. So for example, since the script has access to whatever the currently selected measure is, well, then you could just reuse the format string expression on that measure and bring that into the formula. So basically now off the top of my head, I'm probably not able to write this, but my point is that you could end up generating a script that would look something like like this, right? Where you bring in the whatever format string is on the base measure and you apply that using the format. Now the problem is with this approach is since it converts this to a string, then you're going to end up with a measure that you cannot use in bar charts or column charts, anything like that.
Yes.
So if you wanted to be able to provide different formatting on the same measure and keep everything as values, then you should read up on calculation groups, which is this new feature that was announced for analysis services a while ago, and which a couple of months from now will also be available in Power BI Desktop through Tabular Editor. This is one of the features that Tabular Editor is going to enable, because calculation groups allow you to dynamically set the format string of the measure. So
our recommendation, I think, in general of this one would be if you're trying to do a change between different unit types, a switch statement is probably not the best scenario for you, because the format of that measure that's coming out of the switch statement has to be kind of the same. It has to be like a number, or it has to be all dollars, or whatever that formatting looks like. Calculation groups solves that problem. So calculations does a lot of things that a switch statement does, but it does so with the ability to independently format that calculation group as the output comes through. So yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually going to throw in a link from SQL BI that talks about introducing calculation groups. And I believe in there they also talk about how you can change the formatting between different calculations used inside that calculation group. So that's really the solution I think you're looking for.
Yeah.
One other question right here. So Brent is asking, wondering if we'll be able to explain, if you have the ability to blah, 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 we'll try it again. Wondering if you can explain scripting for perspectives of a data model. So if I need to add a perspective or add some language around perspectives.
Yeah. So so first of all, with perspectives, and again, this is assuming that you're using analysis services, which fully supports editing and manipulating perspectives using Tabular Editor. This is not supported in Power BI Desktop at the moment. And also, even if you could add perspectives to your Power BI dataset, there's no way for the end user in Power BI to actually consume the perspective. So we don't have any options in the UI to select a certain perspective once you're connected to a model. But anyway, let's say I create a perspective for this model. You can use the scripting options here as well to work with this perspective as well. So let's say that you wanted to make sure that you add every single object, or let's say you wanted to add every single measure of your model to this perspective without anything else. So once again, you can drag in the object to get a reference. So this reference here basically represents the perspective. And now, if what I want to do, let's store this in a variable. Let's call this perspective, whatever. And now, if what I wanted to do was to make sure that every single measure of my model has been added to this perspective, because on a real life model, I could have hundreds of measures scattered across all the tables of the model. So iterating through all of them, and you know, through the UI, you could of course, you know, multi-select, and then you could say, okay, add them to this perspective right here. That's not a big deal. But if all the measures are scattered across different tables, and if you want to add some conditional logic in there that only certain kinds of measures should be added, that's what you can use the scripting for. So for this simple example, I'm just going to loop across all measures on my model. And then for each measure M, there's a property here called inPerspective. InPerspective is actually an array, and the arguments to that array would be the perspective, which you would, where you want to know whether or not this object is included in that perspective. It actually corresponds to this object down here, shown in perspective, that you have in the property grid. You can see right now it says shown in 0 out of 1 perspectives. You can expand it, and you can see, okay, so we have the new perspective in our model. Right now it doesn't show up in new perspective. But now if we set this to true and run the script, we can now see that immediately the value down here changes. So now it says shown in 1 out of 1 perspective, and that's true. So basically now we've made sure that every single measure of our model is now visible in this perspective. And we can double check that by going up here in the drop down at the top left, choosing new perspective here. And then Tabular Editor will only show objects that are visible in this perspective. And sure enough, right now, it's only the measures of my model that is that are visible in this perspective. All other objects, columns, hierarchies, and whatever else I have in there will be gone. But all the measures of the model, thanks to this script, will have been added to the perspective. So I hope that answers the question on this.
Yep.
Yeah.
And with that, we have finished all the questions. So thank you all very much for attending. I appreciate it. Daniel, thank you super much for your time. I know your time is extremely valuable. We love that you're doing this. This is awesome. Your tool is absolutely incredible. Thank you so much again. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.